Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journeys, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2024. And that brings us to a set which was released back in January, the early part of January 2024, in fact, of a set that was, or that is already existing in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog at spine number 782 as the set. But on this occasion of 2024, Criterion re-released this, but this time employing the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray format. And so that's what we have here for purposes of today. And the set I'm referring to is this, which is the Apu trilogy, the Oppu trilogy. And this is from the filmmaker Satyajit Ray. We have already begun discussing one of the films in this work, which is called APARAJITO. But today, if it's okay with you, I'd like to focus on another film, which can be found in this really, I think, monumental physical media set. And this is the work which is described as being from the year 1956. And this film is given its own individual spine number as well. The spine number is 784. And the filmmaker is Satyajit Ray. And the name of the work is APARAJITO. This is the work, the follow-up to the earlier film from Satyajit Ray, that earlier film being APARAJITO. And this film, this follow-up film, which is described as being from the year 1956, has among its incredible cast people like Kanu Banerjee and Karuna Banerjee and Smaran Gosal and Pinaki Sengupta and others. And this is from the filmmaker, the director and producer and screenwriter of this work, Satyajit Ray, and with music by Ravi Shankar, the cinematography once again by Subhatra Mitra, and the story, this is based upon the novels, the writing by Bibhutisham Bandyopadhyay or Bibhutisham Banerjee. And this is the work which is again the follow-up, the sequel, the continuation of the story that we came across in APARAJITO, this film being APARAJITO. So APARAJITO is re-emerging in the context of the Criterion set, the Blu-ray or 4K UHD Blu-ray set. And I should point out that we had seen it some years prior in this earlier release, which was from some years back, the Blu-ray set. But now we have, once again, for the benefit of the 4K UHD technology, we have this new re-release of this. So very interesting indeed. And of course, APARAJITO is part of this so-called trilogy of films, focusing in on, among other characters, this character of Oppu. And I should point out too that it does follow along the footsteps of the earlier work, APARAJITO, including some plot points. And so for those who, let's say, are approaching these films for the first time, my strong suggestion is to watch them in order. So watching this film, I think it benefits one to have seen or to understand the story that has occurred in the earlier film, APARAJITO. And indeed, I will be making some reference to APARAJITO and that story. So once again, I strongly recommend that if you haven't seen any of the films yet, please start with APARAJITO, the first film in the so-called trilogy, and then you can follow on this, which is considered the second film in the so-called trilogy, which is APARAJITO, because I really believe that a watch of the first film or an understanding of the first film is very beneficial in getting into the beats and the rhythms and the story arcs and the character arcs that we find so wonderfully laid out and represented and presented in this, again, magnificent work from Ray, which is APARAJITO. So with that being said, I'm assuming, therefore, you have at least seen APARAJITO, and maybe you know the story of APARAJITO, because the film does I think to a certain degree rely on that. It doesn't speak directly to, one can say, the specific plot threads of Patapachali specifically, but we do see the continuation of what happens at the end of Patapachali when the family are uprooted and leave their earlier village surroundings, and now they are in a more a sort of they are in a more a different surrounding, shall we say? And this is the Varanasi area, and overlaying or beside the very famous river, the Ganges River, and we do see the father and the mother and the young son Apu, but we don't see, of course, the sister Durga, because we understand what happened to her very tragically and very sadly toward the end of the earlier film Patapachali. But we do see a continuation of this, and part of this aspect of the film is the growing up or the adolescence of the young boy Apu. And we see how the growing up and adolescence of his, say, path in this film are essentially either parallel or in contravention to or in contradiction against other lines of, say, life and emotion that have already been planted and have developed in Patapachali and now finding further form and further, say, passages of time, as it were, in the context of APARAJITO. For example, the father, we see his, say, goings on, the ways that he is interacting with the community, the way that he's making a living with certain pockets of the community here in Varanasi area. We also see how Opu's life and home life is being affected or is very much the same, or there are many ways in which the father, and in particular perhaps the mother, who is still a very direct and very grounded presence in the family cycle of this film, especially during the early adolescent years of Opu as we find him in this work, how she still is finding or struggling with or trying to come to grips with aspects of Opu growing up, aspects and signs of his education, how this is maybe in one way is a type of quote unquote path forward in one way, but perhaps it also is a signifier of her own, say, seemingly diminishment in terms of the direct influence and importance that is perceived, that she perceives herself to have, say, in the heart and mind and soul and eyes of Opu as he himself is growing older. And perhaps, maybe naturally or unnaturally as the case may be, perhaps is finding himself being drawn away from the family unit and towards something that might be said to be forging a path or a future for his own. And then in that way, too, the idea of Opu as a young boy and Opu as a student who is, of course, growing and becoming older, and but still trying to engage with education and the education system in terms of higher education and even higher levels of education, possibly both in the glimpses in terms of how we see him in the classroom himself, quotations of poetry which also indicate his own interests and likes, which may have themselves some parallels with his own father, if we remember in this film, but also in the previous film, Patapachali had an artistic inclination, especially towards the theater, and we see glimpses of Opu himself rather being maybe inspired or spurred on, or quoting passages of poetry which are very lyrical and very beautiful. But it also means some kind of step, perhaps in a way that may or may not have room for his father and his mother. And we do see also in that, say, growth and development of Opu, we do see the cycles of life also causing changes and turns, both in a maybe in an understandable way, but also in a very quietly sad and maybe introspective way. So much like the first film, Potapachali, we do, as filmmakers, as film viewers, and as audience members, do feel the pangs and the pulls and the stretches of anxiety and sadness and bouts of real life life affirming moments, and also maybe moments of realization of the sort of impermanence of things when we are confronted with aspects of death and parting. And those come quite vividly in stirring passages that are, again, in the hands of Subhatra Mitra, the cinematographer, and also Satyajit Ray, the filmmaker, and the music of Ravi Shankar and others. They form bold and cinematically, poetically beautiful passages that are linked to, say, moments of, say, the Festival of Light, and aspects of birds and flight, and then also death, the very concrete and very almost stoically stubborn aspects of death, which is affects all, and including those who are part of the inner circle of the family and friends, in particular the family unit that we see here with Apu and company in this work, APARAJITO. So this concept of life and this concept of death, as we've seen handled with such deftness and a great deal of tact and gracefulness from the first film, continues on with that high degree of sensitivity, and also ushering in a sweeping sense of use of cinematic language to express these very profound and very important and significant moments in the lives of the world of Apu and others, and indeed the lives of all of us, because that also allows us as viewers the entry points, the accessibility points, the points of accessibility into this grand and beautiful and delicate world of APARAJITO. And then we also have one of the key relationships, one could say, is that between the mother and Apu, the mother and the son. We had seen how the key relationship could be said to be between the mother and the daughter, Durga, in the earlier film, Potter Pachali. There are, of course, other relationships that were really vividly portrayed in that film, which I've tried to discuss in the earlier video. But here, one can say that there is maybe a kind of diametric type of scheme or setup that is, I think, really interestingly established in the film, namely that between the relationship between mother and son on the one hand, but also the son's relationship with, for lack of a better phrase, his own future and his own destiny, vis-a-vis his education and becoming quote-unquote enlightened in the modern world, end quote. And that has, I think, its own travails, but also has its sense of possibilities. And especially at this young age where things are exciting and new and fresh, studying aspects which had hitherto been unavailable or perhaps not possible. Now the excitement is there, the time pressure is there, and this also brings him away from his mother, away from the household, this family household that he had been a part of for all of his life up to now. Now he is studying hard. He needs to work and study, and the time is exhausting and time-consuming, etc. And so that busyness may or may not be part of the way in which the mother and son relationship is being affected, especially as we come to realize or become confronted with the idea or the consideration that time is limited. And when time is limited, we also come to the realization that life is also limited, at least the corporeal sense of it. And when we are confronted with that, we also come to realize that maybe the relationship between the mother and son has certain implications in the long term that may affect things going forward. This is the stuff of life, the cycle of life. And with the great grand flourishes of the, as I say, cinematic poetry, the way in which nature and uses of nature are intertwined into this ever-growing appreciation of the dynamism of life and also the solemnity of life. Well, there are some moments, especially with the mother and how she's looking out into certain aspects of the outside twilight, and there are moments of the insects and that are glowing in the night, or the way that birds fly and flight at key moments of life and death, as well as the quote-unquote moments of intimacy, moments of Apu meeting other people in the school community, the teachers and studies, and how this also is reflective, perhaps directly, indirectly, of a type of socioeconomic order that seems to be established. We're also reminded too of a type of, say, class or a caste type of maybe a viewpoint or outlook that is also seemingly embedded in the way certain people are carrying about within the educational circles, and this being even in a indirect way, something that is not touching the lives of Apu. And we also understand, therefore, the sacrifices, both in terms of time and finances and resources, and also emotionally, that has has up to now, I think, devoted to sort of the life path that we slowly but surely see revealed before us when we consider the character of Apu. And when we recall those moments from the earlier work, Pater Pacelli, everything that happened in that film and all the lives that were affected by the events of that film and how they're carried over into this film, there is a grand weight that is undeniable. And when those final moments of the film do occur, leading into the darkness of what is to come, perhaps inviting us to wonder what might happen beyond the real frames of APARAJITO. I think there is a type of magic and wonder, and also unease, and also a sense of perhaps even type of quiet dread of something that we have seen that may sit easily or perhaps uneasily, depending on our own life view and perspectives. But I think that's part of the point of watching a work like APARAJITO. We are seeing many things that are perhaps that are universally known and acceptable and accessible, things that I think many people can link to, because they are things that they affect us all on the one hand, while of course reminding us of the wonderful grand flourishes of the cinema of Bengal, or the culture of Bengal, in the hands of Ravi Shankar and Sumatra Mitra and Satyajit Ray and others, through of course implications and wonderful flourishes of cinematic poetry that have their roots in not only the Banerjee work and novel, but also symbolic linkages to Bengal and Bengali culture, which will also be highlighted in the course of, say, some of the supplements that we find in this grand release. This is, again, one of the great works. This is one of the great works. It is a film that sits, I think, very complementarily to the work of Pater Pacelli, but also stands on its own. I think it stands on its own in many ways because it does take certain turns of life that could be said to be continuations of what we saw in the previous film, but also things that are themselves their own unique, identifiable thing. And so I think that's what makes this a very successful and powerful work. Again, I am reminded of the comments that I started out with in the start of this video, which is, of course, I think it does benefit one to know the story and events of Pater Pacelli, the earlier film, before embarking upon a journey into the film of APARAJITO. But that does not in any way, in my view, diminish the power and the directness and even the audacity of this work. As I say, it does sit uneasy in certain ways. It answers the questions that it posits, but I think that's part of the ebb and flow of life. And we also understand that, yes, the path has been filled with a lot of joys and a lot of trials and tribulations for Apu and company, but we also know that the path, as finite as we might understand it to be, and as we are reminded as it is, this path of life, we're reminded how finite it is and how limited it is. It also has, for certain people, ways forward. And we are, of course, intrigued by what is to come based upon what we have seen thus far. And if anything, if we can say anything, what we have seen or what we are to see in a work like APARAJITO is truly magnificent and splendid indeed. So this is the work, which is APARAJITO. The Criterion Collection has released this film, APARAJITO, as part of this box set, the Apu trilogy. And again, this is a re-release or re-emergence because, as we've noted before, this had already been released, or it already currently exists in the earlier Blu-ray release from some years back. But now we have the benefit of the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo format edition, which is what we have here. And I happen to have the 4K disc in the player right now. I should point out that the booklet does mention notes about the restorations, which does recall the notes that we had seen from the earlier Blu-ray release of the films, including APARAJITO. So I draw your attention to the notes, which begin around pages 38 and 39 of the booklet. And I should point out here that it says for Pater Pacelli, for APARAJITO, it says presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.37 to 1. And for APARAJITO, 4K digital master was created on an Aeroscan film scanner with wet gate technology from Academy Film Archive's original negatives. And additional film elements used for APARAJITO included two 35mm duplicate negatives, one from the Academy Film Archive and one from the Harvard Film Archive. And for APARAJITO, a 35mm print from the Venice Film Festival and a 35mm fine grain from the Academy of Film Archive was used for the remastering efforts for the original monaural soundtracks. And so this is the information here. I should point out too that the booklet was also made available in the earlier Blu-ray set, Patapachali, and so we have it here. So I should point out in this it does make same notes with regard to APARAJITO, and based on my own, say, my own low-skilled eyesight, because I'm very, very lacking in skill when it comes to detecting these things. But to my own eyes and ears, it seems to me that we are getting the same presentation materials that we had seen in the earlier Blu-ray release. We are getting that as the basis for this new 4K UHD plus Blu-ray release. So therefore, to my understanding, and again, based upon how I've seen this film now on the 4K disc, as well as my understanding of how it looked in the Blu-ray before, as well as now because of the Blu-ray inclusion for this new re-release in January 2024, it looks like we're dealing with the same presentation materials. But I don't think that's a bad thing, given what is I about to say, which is, of course, I think if you have the Blu-ray of Apu Trilogy already, this may or may not be something that you might be considering getting again. With the 4K, because I think the Blu-ray is not just serviceable, it's one of the greatest examples of restorations and physical media releases, I think, ever. And I've tried to emphasize that in my earlier discussion of Potapachali, but this was and is one of the great releases. And the fact that we're dealing with the same, or maybe the same presentation materials as the basis for this new re-release, I don't think takes anything away from the greatness of this release overall. So now you just have the choice of what format to watch it in. And so if you haven't had a chance to watch the Oppo trilogy, and if you are keen on, say, the 4K release or the 4K presentation, you're going to get a great, great time when you watch all these films, including APARAJITO, if you opt for the new 2024 re-release of this. Or if you already have it, you're in fine hands, because I think this is still splendid, and this is a reminder just how splendid it is. And again, I don't think it's any knock on the new Criterion release that it's a quote unquote, we're not seeing quote unquote any improvement end quote from the earlier release in terms of the presentation, because I'm always reminded again just how close we were to the brink when it came to not being able to see these films, including APARAJITO, in the way in which we are now able to see it, which is in this wonderfully restored way. Again, the circumstances around being able to watch these films prior to the Criterion release from several years back, and then the re-emergence of it now, I think we are reminded of that in the restoration notes in the booklet. So please refer to that. But it would have been, again, we could have been in a situation where we would never be able to see these films in the condition we are able to see them. And so given that, what could have happened, and given what we now have, I think whatever option you opt for, you're going to get your money's worth. So, and it is, again, a great, great reminder, a really, really great reminder of just how important this specific restoration process was for these films. And it's a reminder too, when restoration can be done right, it's it's worth to celebrate it, whether it be with the original Blu-ray release, from some years back, or whether it's with this new re-release, which now has the 4K option again for those who might be interested. And again, of course, we have to remember too that 4K is a very viable option for those consumers who seek out the 4K alternative and option. So if you are one of those people, then this is a great benefit to you. So I think it works out all around. And again, if you have the Blu-ray already, maybe you are okay with that. And if you are in that position, you are in excellent, excellent hands. And perhaps this re-release maybe won't, it maybe not as an occasion for you to get the set again, but if it's an occasion for you to then take the Blu-ray off of your shelf and then pull out the films, pull out APARAJITO and put it back into the machine and play it again, then I think uh, I think the release announcement and indeed the release from January 2024 has done its duty. I think with flying colors. So whatever the case is, I think it's a win-win. And going back to this work, APARAJITO, it still looks great. I think it looks great in the 4K and it looks great in the Blu-ray. It looks and sounds great. And I also remember, again, I mentioned a little bit with my Pater Pachali discussion about how I had seen these prior to the Criterion release, but then watching them on the Criterion release was a magical experience, and now watching them again with this new release, still an incredibly magical experience. And so now what I've done is I've put the Blu-ray into the machine, and I've put the 4K disc back here. Actually, when I first got it, the 4K disc was on the top part here, and then the Blu-ray disc was on the bottom. But I just put this 4K disc here for the benefit of just ease of removal once I'm done with the Blu-ray. But now the Blu-ray is in the player because I do want to show the supplements. So as we have seen before, the Criterion Collection 4K UHD and Blu-ray releases will have the film either you'll have the film available to watch on the 4K disc or the Blu-ray disc. And then, but with the supplements, we will have the Blu-ray to rely on. The supplements won't be found on the 4K disc, so you're going to have to put the Blu-ray into the machine and watch the supplements there. But here, let me just show briefly what we have in terms of supplements, which is things that we have seen before. But again, what we have seen before in previous Criterion releases, we're going to get here again. So it's worth checking out. Well, let's discuss first what we do have before, which is what we had. Let's first discuss what we have now, which is what we had before. So when you press the supplements menu, we have first the small details. And it describes here, in the following interview conducted for the Criterion Collection in 2013, film writer Ujjal Chakraborty discusses the many symbolic details throughout APARAJITO. So this is approximately 11 minutes, and it's described here as being from 2013. And so Chakraborty here, I think very astutely and very brilliantly and clinically breaks down specific aspects of the key points of reading of this work, APARAJITO. It is APARAJITO specific. It does make some references to Patabachali and also to Apu Chanchar, but it is APARAJITO specific. So this is really great. Small details. This refers to, in the words of Chakraborty, the idea, or one of the ideas, are how Satyajit Ray's cinematic poetry, the Ray aesthetic, the cinema aesthetic, at least in the form of works like APARAJITO and the other works in the so-called Apu trilogy, rely on certain symbols that could be said to be recollections or ideas or themes that are instantly and immediately recognizable to those who understand and appreciate and have lived in and have experiences with Bengal or Bengali culture or Kolkata or etc., and how these symbols are also interspersed throughout the works. And specifically APARAJITO, he gives some great examples of this. I've mentioned a little bit some famous scenes from APARAJITO involving again, for the benefit of those who have not yet seen the film, I don't want to go into too much detail, but there are some famous scenes involving key characters and life and death and the festival of life and the symbolic nature of birds and pigeons and flight, and how this is set against the backdrop of Varanasi area. And also the discussion here of the idea of the rural countryside versus the sort of cosmopolitan aspect, and how this cosmopolitan nature of the culture of Varanasi was really paving the way for this part of the characterization of Apu, and the way in which Apu is able to therefore find himself encountering a mix of different cultures that represent various backgrounds and cultures of India writ large. And this is also making a reference to how this might serve a sense of Apu's own character traits and dynamism and developments as being one who either now or perhaps even in later films like say Apu Shanshar might be seen to be one who can be adaptable and can be mobile and can find himself uh, 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 integrating with and engaging with and being connected with various cultures within the landscape of India, whether it's south or the north, and that's due, I guess, again, one of the hypotheses of this great discussion, that is due to this upbringing that is part of the one of the key parts of Aparajito, at least the early half of it, at least. So this is incredibly important in terms of the characterization of Apu. And in that context, we have more of the so-called symbols, the small details, the little things that make up the grandness of life. And here we have a great discussion of a word, and I don't know the language, so this kind of discussion was so great for me. The explanation of this phrase, pran paki. Pranpaki. So I thought that was really fascinating. Again, interwoven with a specific detail of Aparajito, which is indeed one of the most famous passages, cinematic passages in all of Satyajit Ray's works, I understand. So, and then also the spiritual faith and healing, and maybe the practical applications or the practical limitations of that. The element of the Ganges and how this is also portrayed in the work of Parajito and the like. And also a little discussion about Satyajit Ray and his approach to filmmaking, the preparation, the way in which he approached storyboards here in the context of Aparajito versus how he approached it in a slightly different way in the earlier film Patra Pachali, which also gives rise to a discussion about how Patra Pachali was made in somewhat different circumstances than the making of Aparajito, because Aparajito was made in very much in the sort of the light and benefit of the great success that was met, that the film Patra Pachali met. And it was almost done with a sense of maybe serendipity, cinematic serendipity. And there's also some discussion too about how maybe there was a way in which maybe certain audiences, domestic audiences, maybe reacted slightly differently to Parajito than they did to Pata Pachali. That's also referenced by Satyajit Ray elsewhere, but that it still found a kind of global success in certain areas of the festival circuit, for example. So this is overall a brilliant essay, discussion with Chakraborty about Aparajito, and it's Aparajito specific, so which is a really great thing about it as well. So please check it out if you can. This is approximately 11 minutes. Really worth checking out. Then we have a conversation with Satyajit Ray, 1958, and it says here, in August 1958, director Satyajit Ray attended the Robert Flaherty Film Seminar in Vermont on the occasion of the U.S. release of Patra Pachali. By this time, Ray had also completed Aparajito and The Philosopher's Stone, and The Music Room would soon premiere. During the seminar, film critic Gideon Bachman recorded a conversation with Ray, audio excerpts from which are presented here. So this is approximately 14 minutes overall, and it's described as being audio excerpts. And it's audio, so when you press play, it'll get you to a screenshot. And actually, I'll press play here. You can't hear the audio because I've turned the volume down, but you get this shot, and that's Ray standing on the left-hand side of it, and then you'll hear the audio of Satyajit Ray speaking to Gideon Bachman about this. So now let me go back to the menu. And so this could be said to be, it's not Aparajito specific, because it does speak a lot about, say, the making of Patra Pachali throughout the majority of it, one can say. So it is somewhat, say, of a look at the career of Satyajit Ray during this period, again, touching upon other films as well, such as The Philosopher's Stone, a little bit about Aparajito, not that much, but a little bit about Aparajito, but perhaps primarily about Patra Pachali, because again, around this time, this was the occasion of what is described as the U.S. release around 1958. So, but he does talk about here his method of approach to storytelling and stories, adapting books, because remember this is based upon the novel, the works, Banerjee works. Um, and adaptations versus writing new stories, this is also brought up. The concept of music, how Ravi Shankar's music and how the contribution of this, how it came about in the first place, and also some other works that Satyajit Ray mentions here. For example, Bicycle Thieves, which I think forms a really interesting maybe compare and contrast with the works of Satyajit Ray during this period, specifically APARAJITO and Padapachali. I think there's some similarities that one can make with Bicycle Thieves, but there are some very striking differences, thus making, I think, Satyajit Ray's works their own unique individual things, but of course also paying tribute and respect to um, Bicycle Thieves and Desika and others. But in any event, that's a really fascinating conversation discussion here. And there's a brief mention of the Philosopher's Stone, and as I say, a brief mention of Parajito. But it is perhaps Rai specific, or the approach and the artistic approach, artistic and literary approach to that Rai adopts with respect to works primarily in the context of the making of Patapachali. But it's still very relevant. So it's really great stuff. Again, this is approximately 14 minutes, 14 minutes. So please check it out if you can. And then we have Making the Apu Trilogy, Satyajit Ray's epic debut. And this is the following video essay written and narrated by Satyajit Ray biographer Andrew Robinson and produced by the Criterion Collection in 2015, looks at the evolution and production of the Apu trilogy. And this is approximately 38 minutes. This is also, as the title suggests, this is also one that is not Aparajito specific, exclusive, but it does focus on the other films, those being, well, the films being Patapachali, and I would say for most of the running time, it does focus, I think, on the early beginnings of Rai's career in Patapachali, which is undoubtedly a really important, significant, perhaps one of the most significant aspects of Rai's career in terms of the ability for him to make further films, thanks to the great success of Patapachali. So a lot is spoken about here in terms of the funding and the sources of funding or the lack thereof, and how the crew had to deal with this, the working with sort of non-professional actors and finding ground. How it became a real force. It's one of the ultimate independent films of all time, Patapachali. So one of the ultimate independent filmmakers, Satyajit Ray, and his working relationships with the actors on the set, or the locations, I should say, not set, but locations, and then also working with the artists, the cinematographer, Subhadra Mitra is mentioned, of course, Ravi Shankar is mentioned. And then it goes into some aspects of the other films, such as Aparajito, and this idea of a surge of release, and some details emerging about key elements of the adaptation of the Banerjee underlying work, and how certain lines or suggestions in the underlying novel, in particular about the relationship between mother and son, were, in as described here in this great Robinson video essay, were expanded upon and expounded upon by Rai in the development of the story of Aparajito, which I think is one of the most striking and very uneasy, and I mean that in a very positive way, a very uneasy aspect of the way in which the mother-son relationship is depicted in Aparajito, in a way which is also perhaps ushering in, for better or for worse, a sense of modernity and Apu, which is, I think, very bold and very brave on the part of Rai. So that's also referenced here as well. Also, the way in which certain performances are captured. Again, Karuna Banerjee is mentioned with her monumental performance as the matriarch, and also ways in which the production of Aparajito differed from Patapachali, in that there were more aspects of quote unquote maybe the professional side of the filmmaking industry in this manner, the way certain shots were lit, the way in which sets were developed, and how that was edited seamlessly with on-site locations, etc., and the like. So these are really interesting details that emerge that highlight ways in which Aparajito in spirit is very similar to Pather Panchali, but also in its making and perhaps in its genesis, also very different. It's a different breed of film in a manner of speaking. So that I think is also very fascinating, and also its success that it found overseas. Rai does mention, and was also referenced by Andrew Robinson, about how this maybe didn't find as much success domestically as Pather Panchali, but it found great success at the Venice Film Festival, and so that brought about again another act of cinema serendipity, perhaps, as described here, as to what would be next. And almost on a whim, Satyajit Ray mentions that there's another film after this, which was Apu Sanchar, which is an interesting one of those what-if scenarios of cinema. And again, also showing almost the great maverick and wonderfully cavalier way in which Satyajit Ray is interacting with the media and the like, and also how it really inspires his own work, because after all, we will get one more film thanks to this, which is the great film Apu Sanchar, which we'll talk about in a separate video. So these and other details emerge, and there are some discussions about Apu Sanchar in this discussion, this Andrew Robinson essay as well. So I would actually suggest that one can watch all of the films first. The Apu trilogy films first, so that's Pather Panchali and then APARAJITO, and then the other film, which we will discuss later, which is called Apu Sanchar. After you have seen all the film, I think you can watch this great essay, because it does touch upon each of the films. But when you have seen the films, watch this, because it's definitely worth it. It gives great context from a Satyajit Ray expert, Andrew Robinson. So this is Making the Apu Trilogy. So please check it out if you can. Last but not least, the creative person, Satyajit Ray. In 1967, Canadian documentarian James Beveridge traveled to Kolkata to film director Satyajit Ray at work. The resulting half-hour program, produced for the American public television series The Creative Person, features interviews with Ray, actors Karuna Banerjee, Sumitra Chatterjee, Madhabi Mukherjee, and Alokananda Roy, producer Debaki Bose, and production designer Bansi Chandragupta, film critic Chidananda Dasgupta, and cinematographer Subhatra Mitra. So this is great. This is it says half an hour, so it's actually 29 minutes by my count, approximately. So among these discussions here, we have some talk about Satyajit Ray's working with professional and non-professional actors. Satyajit Ray is also on screen being interviewed here, by the way, and the acting styles, etc., as well as some of the other actors that we see that are mentioned here. So Mukherjee is mentioned here. Alokananda Roy is also mentioned here. You might recognize from other works of Satyajit Ray, Charulata, for example, as well as other members of the cast and crew that are directly relevant to the Apu trilogy. And I bring your attention to, for example, cinematographer Subhatra Mitra. At the latter half of this, we get some scenes between Satyajit Ray and Subhatra Mitra, which is really wonderful. And again, we are reminded just how important Subhatra Mitra's work is in the context of Ray's cinema, in particular, or for example, perhaps most illustriously so, with the work on the Apu trilogy. So Subhatra Mitra is mentioned here, so it's great to see and hear his comments here, as well as some of the other actors and performers that we see associated with the Apu trilogy. So Sumitra Chatterjee, which we will see in other Ray works such as Apu Sanchar, and then also Karuna Banerjee, which of course we know from the great performance that she gives as the mother of Apu in Pather Panchali, and also in this film APARAJITO. So this is, I think, a really comprehensive, great look. Another great look in terms of hearing the voice of Satyajit Ray, seeing him speak as well, which is also really quite wonderful indeed, as well as seeing just how the other actors that he has worked with, how they perceive and really respect and revere the time that they have working with him professionally. So great stuff. This is great stuff. So this is the James Beveridge 1967 29-minute work covering the creative person, The subject here being Satyajit Ray. So please check it out if you can. I should point out too that once again, this shouldn't be considered to be APARAJITO specific or centric, because it does cover. It's actually covering Satyajit Ray as he's in the midst of working on a completely different film, in fact. So it's not APARAJITO specific in that way, but it does touch upon aspects of making the Apu trilogy and his approach to actors and location scouting, etc. So, and the concept of capturing a sense of sort of Bengal culture in many of the films where that is, I think, very much part of the fore. So well done indeed for being able to include. So the creative person as part of the supplements to APARAJITO. So that's what we have. Again, to my knowledge, we don't have anything quote-unquote new on the occasion of this 2024 4K UHD and Blu-ray release. It would have been nice if we had maybe a commentary track or something, or something else. It would have been nice to have had it. Don't get me wrong, I definitely feel that way. But I am also reminded about how great these supplements are. Maybe if I had to say something about the supplements originally as I found them, it would have been nice to have had maybe one more APARAJITO specific discussion. I'm not at all familiar with the underlying literature works by Banerjee, Banerjee, so maybe it would have been interesting to try to get some discussion as to the sort of the literary merits of the work, or the discussion of that, and also the way in which the adaptation makes changes to or otherwise is faithful to the work. That is part of the aspect, one of the fascinating aspects in particular of APARAJITO. So that would have been interesting to have had. It would have been very helpful. But of course, that its non-inclusion in this or the new release doesn't prevent me, of course, from making my own exploration and research into that topic. So, and there are aspects in the early existing supplements which I think give rise to at least jumping off points in that direction. So bravo for being able to include that. So this is the way in which the supplements work out, again, on the Blu-ray of this great release, once again, of APARAJITO. And once again, let me say that we will talk about the booklet, which is the stable booklet, which is also a reminder of what we'd seen in the earlier Blu-ray disc release, which is fantastic, and so now is fantastic. There isn't any APARAJITO specific essay here. There is APARAJITO specific pages on pages 4 and 5 of this booklet here, cast and crew details, plus a still image of a key character in the film, which is also mirroring what we saw on the Blu-ray and 4K menu. And the writings we will talk about before, because we will talk about it in a separate video, excuse me, because the writings included in this booklet are of a sort of overall view of the trilogy writ large, and also Satyajit Ray's career in the context of this trilogy. But there are some APARAJITO specific points in the essays, mind you, but we'll talk about the essays and the wrap-up of the packaging, etc., in a separate video. But that is, in a nutshell, my thoughts upon the great film APARAJITO, and again, this wonderful release from earlier the year, 2024, a reminder of the glory of this work APARAJITO and the greatness and the brilliance of Satyajit Ray's Apu trilogy and the filmmaker Satyajit Ray. So if you haven't seen this film, what are you waiting for? Now is your chance, my dear friends. This is one of the greats. Now, this is the work, again, described as being from the year, yes, 1956. The work is APARAJITO. So that's it for now, my dear friends. So until the next video, and we will talk about the film which comes after this, which is called Apu Shonsar. So I look forward to seeing you at the next video, my dear friends. But until then, please continue to be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including APARAJITO, including other works in the Apu trilogy, including works by Satyajit Ray, and beyond. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.